Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. For today's video, I am going to be doing my March and April wrap-up of all the books that I have read over the last 2 months. The reason I have decided to combine these, because I don't normally do combined wrap-ups, is because I only read 3 books in March and 3 books in April, and I don't have like a whole lot to say about each of them, so it felt like it would be a little bit too short to do separate videos for each month, so I thought I would just combine them. Another reason I kind of hate doing these is because at this point it's now May and I feel like I've forgotten even more some of the books that I read in March. I'm going to try my best, but if it seems like I don't have a lot of thoughts to share about each book, it's because the thoughts have already left my head. But without further ado, let's get started. I also had to return some of these books back to the library, so I'm just going to be posting the pictures up on the screen here. So the first book that I finished back in March was the Umbrella Academy Volume 2, which is called Dallas. So if you watched my January wrap-up, I think that is when I read Volume 1 of the Umbrella Academy, and you will know that I was kind of underwhelmed with the book. Having been such a big fan of the TV show, I think I was just like a little bit disappointed with the graphic novel. Some of the issues that I had with it was I wasn't a super big fan of the art style. I also just found it to be very confusing, which could have just been because I'm not super used to reading graphic novels, so it was a little difficult for me to follow, and on top of not really liking the art style, that also made it difficult with what was going on the page, and overall I was just kind of underwhelmed with it. But I thought I would give it a second chance and read Volume 2, and I'm so glad that I did because I actually had such a fun time reading this book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Pretty much everything that I didn't like about the first one was very much improved in this one, which I don't know if that's the book genuinely being better or just me being more adapted to the art style and more adapted to reading graphic novels. I was far less confused reading this book. I don't know if there was like less action scenes in here that were confusing to me, because that was like a big problem with the first one, but I was just far less confused reading this book. I also just think the way that the plot went in this was a lot more interesting for me. We followed Klaus a lot more, and he is my favorite character from the TV show, although that being said, I think number 5 is still my favorite character when it comes to the graphic novels. So yeah, I just really enjoyed this one. I also think I liked the art style a little bit more now that I was more used to it, because I was like confusing some of the characters when I read the first volume, but in this one I think I was just more adapted to it. It's still not like my favorite art style visually, but I think I enjoyed it a little bit better, and I have the third one on hold from the library, so I will be starting with that one very soon. The second book I finished in March is this collection of Edgar Allan Poe poetry. So this is The Raven and Other Poems. There's actually quite a lot of poems in this book. I don't know if you can really tell, but there's a lot of poems in here, and I thoroughly enjoyed a lot of them. I do remember reading Edgar Allan Poe in school, but like I don't actually remember what I read or like how I liked it and stuff like that. So even though I've read Poe before, this very much felt like I was reading it for the first time. A lot of his stuff is darker and has more of a spooky feel to it, which, me just being the kind of person that I am, it automatically is just something that I enjoy, I guess. I don't really know. Poetry is still something I feel like I'm a little too stupid for, to be completely honest with you, but I actually had an easier time reading this than some other like poetry from this time period that I've read. So I don't know if his language is genuinely easier for me or if I just genuinely enjoy Poe's poetry more than others. But yeah, I had a much easier time reading this than I anticipated. I was actually a little bit intimidated going into this book, but some of my favorite ones that I read in here was, of course, The Raven, and one of the other ones that I really enjoyed was called For Annie. So those were just a couple of the ones that really stood out to me reading this book, but I definitely plan on reading more Edgar Allan Poe in the future now that I don't feel as intimidated by his writing. And then the final book that I read in March was another graphic novel, and that is Batman the Killing Joke. So this is pretty much like my first try into reading the DC comics. The only other one that I've read before this was a couple years ago. I read Volume 1 of Sandman, which, to be completely honest with you, I went into that book having no idea that it was a part of the DC universe, and it was only halfway through, maybe even more than that, that I was like, they're referencing a lot of DC related things, and then I like Googled it and I was like, oh, well that makes sense. So I'm not counting that, and I eventually would actually really like to go back and reread that and read through all of the Sandman graphic novels, but let's just say that this is my first try into reading DC graphic novels, and I actually really enjoyed it. The reason that I picked this one up specifically was because it kept popping up on a lot of like lists of must-reads if you were reading through the DC novels, as well as it was blurbed by Tim Burton, so that was like the final thing that convinced me to actually pick it up, and I ended up really enjoying it. I don't remember exactly what rating I gave it. I think it was like 3.5 out of 5 stars, so it wasn't like overly amazing. I think if I like read some of the other graphic novels in the same universe and then went back and reread this, I would probably enjoy it even more once I'm more like involved in this universe. But for right now, I still really enjoyed it. I really liked the art style of it. It was very like colorful, surprisingly. I don't know why I say surprisingly, but I guess I just wasn't really expecting it. But also it's the Joker, and I feel like he's pretty colorful, so it was very colorful and I really liked the artwork. I do remember though feeling like it ended really abruptly. I don't know if that was just me, but yeah, I felt like it ended really abruptly. But I also tried to watch the movie, like the animated movie in which the Joker is voiced by Mark Hamill, and I don't know what was up with that film, but I couldn't get halfway through it. Like, I felt like I was watching it for an hour and there was not a lot of the Joker happening for a movie that is about the Joker. I felt like it was really lacking in the Joker and there was more of him in the graphic novel, so that's a thing I just thought that I would share with you, is I really tried with the movie but it wasn't working for me. So yeah, I would recommend the graphic novel. I can't say that I'd recommend the film. So now moving on to the books that I read in April, starting off with Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. This is a nonfiction book about Christianity, as you may have guessed. To give you a little idea of what you're going to find in this book, it is split up into 4 books. So the title of the 4 books is Right and Wrong as a Clue to the Meaning of the Universe. Book 2 is called What Christians Believe. Book 3 is Christian Behavior. And book 4 is Beyond Personality, or First Steps in the Doctrine of the Trinity. So that should give you a little idea of like what you're going to find in this book. I really enjoyed this. I think I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The only thing that I think really could have been better with this book is if he actually like referenced specific verses and like had actual verses featured in this book, kind of like having the source material for what you're talking about. But besides that, I really enjoyed it. I think there's a lot of things in here that would be useful for anybody to read about, like even if you are not a Christian, but maybe you want to just learn more about what Christians believe and kind of see things from their perspective. I feel like this would be a good book to pick up. Also, just in general, there are some like pretty good moral ideas in the Bible that could be useful to kind of remind yourself about. Like, even though I'm a Christian, and you would think that I would already know a lot of the stuff that I'm reading about in this book, there's a lot of things that as Christians you just kind of forget about in your day-to-day life, and it's good to have things like this to kind of remind you of those things. Like, there was a whole chapter in this book about pride, and frankly it's just like that would just be a good thing for anybody to read about. Like, it just had some good advice for anybody, whether you're religious or not. In conclusion, I can see this being a book that I could recommend to lots of different people in the future, so if you're maybe on the fence about picking it up or not, I would definitely recommend it to you. The second book I finished in April is called The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. So Neil Gaiman is actually currently going on tour. It's called An Evening with Neil Gaiman, and I was lucky enough to actually be able to go to one of his first stops on tour, and so before that I wanted to pick up another one of his books and give it a read. So I ended up picking this up kind of on a whim, having absolutely no idea what it was about, and let me tell you, I was kind of shocked when I got it from the library and it had the horror genre sticker on the spine, because I just would never assume from like the title and even the cover of this book that it would be a horror, but when I saw that I was even more intrigued to give it a read, and I went into it completely blind and I really enjoyed it. So I'm kind of apprehensive telling you too much about what it's about because it's also very short, so I feel like you just can't give too much away when it comes to shorter sorts of books, and there are some books that I just think it's better to just go into them with no idea of what you're about to get yourself into. But to give you like a little inkling of what this book is about, at the beginning of it, we're following our main character when he is grown up and he returns back to his childhood town and one of his like childhood friends' houses, and he ends up being flooded with these memories of what happened to him when he was a child that he seemed to have forgotten about in his adult life. And then that's what the rest of the book is about, is what happened to him when he was a kid. And I don't know, now that I've read it, that I would necessarily consider this to be like a horror book. The more like disturbing elements of it are very, very subtle at first, and it's only until like the very, very end that it gets a little bit more intense, but I still don't know that I would necessarily call it a horror. Although I think the thing that would make this book more horrifying is that it's very unnerving reading from the perspective of a child when there are things happening that you know are wrong as an adult, but because it's happening to a kid, he's like unaware of the fact that what's happening is not quite right. And I think that's like the most horrifying thing of all, is just like knowing that these things are wrong, but like from the eyes of a child, they don't quite know exactly what's happening and how wrong it actually is, if that makes sense. So in that sense, I can see how this book is kind of more horrifying, but like in general, it's not like a super disturbing like horror book or anything like that. But overall, I really enjoyed it, and I definitely think the thing that really makes this book is Neil Gaiman's writing. He truly is like an amazing writer, and especially after seeing him on tour, seeing him talk, it was such a great night. He's actually a very humorous guy as well. Like there were so many times where the whole crowd was laughing, and he read a lot of his own stories on stage, some of his short stories, and he really is just like a brilliant writer. So I really enjoyed this book, and I would totally recommend it to anybody who's looking to pick up maybe a more spookier, unnerving kind of tale. And then the final book that I finished in April, which if I'm being completely honest, is me pushing it a little bit. Basically, I really fell behind in my reading challenge, so I've been trying to read some shorter books, and when I went to see Neil Gaiman live, he read some of his short stories, and I think the longest one that he read was this one I'm about to tell you about, so I decided to count it towards my reading challenge as if I watched like a live audiobook reading of Neil Gaiman reading this story, which is called Chivalry. So this is about an old woman who finds the Holy Grail at like a thrift shop and buys it and puts it on her mantelpiece, and then a knight comes and he really wants it from her, but she is like not willing to give it up. It is such a funny, charming sort of story. When Neil Gaiman was reading it, like there were so many points where the whole crowd was just like chuckling at some of the things that happen in this book. And so as soon as he finished reading it, I knew, I was like, I gotta go home and look that up because I don't want to forget this story specifically, because I just thought it was so good. So if you want to read just like a little short book, when I looked it up on Goodreads, I think it said that it was like 72 pages or something like that, but that I don't think that Neil Gaiman would read 72 pages at a live show that was only about 2 hours long. So I think it's much shorter than that, but it is still like just a lovely little short story, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and I would totally recommend it to read on a little rainy day if you got some time. So yeah, those are all of the books that I read in March and April. I am really gonna try and have a more productive reading month in May. Fingers crossed. I need to catch up on my reading challenge, but alas, this is how my reading has been going. So leave me a comment down below. Let me know if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. I'd love to discuss them with you in the comments. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!